David Eickholt and Tyler Donahue here for Iowa and Penn State 247 Sports. Tyler has always been one of my favorite guys to collab with. And I imagine there aren't many other team sites right now, Tyler, that are busier than you guys right now after probably one of the more hectic weeks since you started covering Penn State. How are you, man?
Yeah, the most hectic week, I think, is probably fair to say. I'm good. I'm happy to jump on here with you. We had you on our podcast midweek. Eventually, we had to come up for air and actually acknowledge there was a game to be played this week. The bye week is next week, and that'll be a little time to kind of do some autopsy on what's happened so far and what went wrong. But yeah, Penn State's got to get ready for a game. We got to get ready for a game. But let's be honest, over at our site right now, it's all being overshadowed by the fact that, shockingly, Penn State fired James Franklin on the second weekend of October of a season that was largely viewed as the best shot at a national championship here in 39 years. So there's tremendous whiplash right now. There's a surreal aspect of it to it. As someone who's covered the team for 9 years and has had a lot of personal and professional interactions with James over that time, seeing how his career actually came to a conclusion in that fashion, there's a lot of people scratching their heads right now, and I'm certainly part of that crowd.
So before we dive into the game, I mean, was it something that you expected? I mean, after the Northwestern loss, I mean, I know entering that game, I thought Penn State was going to bounce back against Northwestern. And then honestly, Tyler, I think I said on your podcast, I actually thought that Iowa, if they ended up beating Penn State, was going to be kind of that final nail in the coffin for James Franklin. Were you guys pretty much on full standby once Sunday rolled around after the game?
Yeah, so I would say after the Oregon game, where they scored 3 points for about 50 minutes of that game, but then they rallied late. They ended up leading in overtime, and you could sense it. It was the best whiteout atmosphere I've been around, David, and I've been to a bunch of them now, and the crowd could sense it. They were actually going to win one of these big top 5 type showdowns against Oregon, send them home with a loss, maybe jettison Penn State towards something special this season, but they didn't end up winning the game. They lost in double overtime, and it felt like, wow, there's going to be major questions about whether this team is equipped to still win those kind of games. And, November 1st against Ohio State. And at that point, we're still thinking playoff matchups down the road. They beat Boise State. They beat SMU last year, but they went up against Notre Dame and they turtled up a little bit late in that game, especially offensively. And then you look at what happened against UCLA, a game that we thought they could walk through a hangover into Pasadena and still come out with a 15-point win or a 20-point win. Well, they were down 27-7 at halftime against the UCLA team that averaged 14 points per game through its first 4 games and had never held a single lead through 240 minutes of football. All of a sudden, they're up by 20 on Penn State in the first half. And so when that game ends, I wrote a column, and it was more so like, are we getting to the point where James Franklin and Penn State are like a couple that's been together for a while, and you've had a lot of great memories together, and it's been a great relationship in a lot of ways, but there still feels unfulfilled. And maybe you just look at each other and say, are we still having fun? Is it time for us to go our separate ways, shake hands? And he lost the ability to kind of take that approach, because what happened against Northwestern, it did feel like coming out of that game, going into his press conference, what he said, what he didn't say that night in Beaver Stadium's media room. I did wake up on Sunday. I went to bed Saturday thinking that may have been my last time in a James Franklin press conference here in State College. And my fingers were crossed. We had a 15 kids over for my daughter's birthday party on Sunday, and it was 11 to 1:30. And I'm like holding the piñata. I'm handing out cupcakes, and I got an eye on my phone. And then right around 2 o'clock, after all the kids had left and we were starting to clean up, I got the word that a decision had been made and that James Franklin had addressed the team, and he hit the exit door. And so I by the time we got to Sunday, yes, I felt like he had probably coached his last game. But I almost had to put myself in a different reality to accept that, because just 3 weeks before that, like I said, they have a lead over Oregon in overtime. Hours before that, James Franklin's on the set of Game Day in the heart of campus on ESPN, sitting next to Nick Saban, who's putting on a Lions suit. And it's like, this guy's the king of the castle. Yes, it's detractors. People don't believe that he can win the big games, but he's the king of the castle here. Now he doesn't have a key to the castle, and we're only in mid-October. We're only at mid-season. I figured if James Franklin wasn't going to stick around with Penn State, it would be something that went down in December or January. But the way they were playing, the way I think the athletic directors thought the locker room was right now, it just seemed like an untenable situation for both James Franklin and for Penn State, and here we are.
Shout out to Penn State for waiting until your daughter's birthday was over.
Yes.
I couldn't even imagine how stressful that would have been if that were me or if that broke around that time. Last question on this, and I kind of want to get more into the nitty gritty of Penn State. Do you think, looking back now, that James Franklin thought that he was done at Penn State after that Northwestern game? Because sometimes there's always those hidden messages where, coaches kind of hint that they know it, but, sometimes us reporters and it takes us to hyper analyze after the decision had been made to go back and say, you know what? I think they knew. Do you think James Franklin knew that it was done?
I think that as, second consecutive game, he's walking to the tunnel, bunch of curse words going his way. His daughters can hear that. Do you want to keep doing that to yourself? I mean, and do you feel like you're going to get over the hump and has it peaked and all those thoughts that you'd think James Franklin, never anticipated he'd have to kind of realize? I think there was probably something to be said. I mean, Mark Brennan, who I work with and has covered this team since the 80s, he pointed out that there were more of a presence of family and friends in that press conference late Saturday night than we'd seen before. I think his support system was trying to do its part because maybe they could sense where things were. He gave by far the shortest opening statement I've ever heard in a James Franklin press conference. And he was asked a couple different times about, where is your head at? And do you want to be the head coach at Penn State? And he kind of talked around that. And he talked about being committed to the locker room. And so unfortunately, where it ends is, I don't know if bad blood's the right word, but I don't know if it's amicable because, when the athletic director walks up those steps in the Lash football building on Sunday morning and tells you the decision has been made, then he did have a chance to address the team, but it's such a sudden span of, 15, 16 days or whatever it was from where you thought anything was possible to where all of a sudden he's not the head coach anymore. I don't even know how much he digested it until maybe deeper into this week, having a chance to step away from things. It's the first time in a long time where he hasn't been responsible on a minute-to-minute basis for 105 players and has their families in mind. And I know that he'll always be tethered to this group, but I'd imagine working his way through the week, a lot of that started to sink in. I don't know how much he knew or would acknowledge on Saturday night when he woke up Sunday that he had coached his last game, but I don't think it was necessarily the biggest surprise when the athletic director comes in and says, hey, we have to have a conversation.
So diving deep into Penn State now, I've been of the outside opinion, Tyler, that Drew Allar got way too much criticism for the criticism around the offense and the team as a whole. I actually thought he played pretty well for the most part. I know he had that interception in that Oregon game. I know, you guys have been high on Ethan Grunkmeyer. I think he was one of the highest risers in that recruiting class over the last 6 months or so. What's your kind of take on this Penn State offense? I do think that the wide receiver core hasn't exactly panned out the way that a lot of people thought, but I will tell you, Kirk Ferentz might not sleep Friday night, and Phil Parker might not sleep Friday night because of Devontae Ross and what he was able to do against Iowa last year. And Kirk Ferentz even said in our press conference this week, it might be the first game he's ever seen where a guy scores 3 touchdowns. Tyler, he wasn't touched on any of the 3 touchdowns in that game. He just found a way just to run right by them. I knew right when he entered the portal, a lot of Iowa fans were like, okay, Iowa fans don't think they're going to get him. Please don't go to a school where they're going to have to play him again. And then all the Iowa reporters and fans, right when he committed to Penn State, were like, oh boy, here we go again. He's coming back into Kinnick. Give me your take about the offense, and maybe do you kind of agree that Drew Allar took a little bit too much criticism? Obviously thinks he could do better, but it's a very interesting group. I'll say that.
Yeah, I think we need to start. I'll start with Devontae Ross because you brought that up. James Franklin mentioned probably 3 or 4 occasions when we asked about Ross, like that highlight reel, that game film was significant in their evaluation of whether they wanted to bring him in and have that jump from the Sun Belt Conference. He was a 1,000-yard receiver last year at Troy, but to do that on the road in an environment that Franklin really respected at Iowa against a coach that he really respected, that spoke volumes to them. And Ross is coming off his first 100-yard receiving game. He had a big 60-yard catch last week that helped them get some energy on offense that they needed. He also had a really, really pivotal fumble on a punt return. He's had some strong moments as a punt returner, but that was a low moment for him. So I would say right now he probably has the most momentum among those three transfer receivers. They also added Trevor Pena, slot player from Syracuse last year, who's right around 1,000 yards for them last season. And then Kyron Hudson, who was a team captain and kind of the second or third receiver for USC last year. These guys have gotten essentially all the reps at wide receiver. Hudson's been up and down. He's a contested catch guy, but he's kind of had some the games where he's disappeared or he's been a non-factor. Trevor Pena has been utilized a bit as a runner, jet sweeps and stuff, and kind of a utility piece, but hasn't really flashed as much in Big Ten play as he did in non-conference action. And Devontae Ross, he was injured in the summer, kind of slowed him down during preseason camp, but he has really come along in a good way. I think he might be their most dangerous wide receiver right now based on what we've seen. But going back to the quarterback, the guy who, whose job it is to help those receivers out and vice versa, I don't know if he's gotten the right amount of blame, but he certainly deserves some blame. Because Drew Allar is someone, we got to put in context who he was coming to campus, right? He was the number one quarterback recruit in the country at 247 Sports. Ethan Grunkemeyer, who will start this Saturday, is the second highest ranked quarterback they've ever brought into this program. And he was like 105 overall in those rankings. Outside of that, Trace McSorley is going to be a legend here for a long time. 3-star player. A lot of college programs were trying to convince him to play safety at the next level. There hasn't been, go back to Christian Hackenberg, who predated James Franklin, who he inherited. Yeah. There was a lot of hype around him. But we were at the point now where he came to the season with 29 career starts. He's played in 3 playoff games. He played in a Big Ten championship game. He showed a lot to people in that Big Ten championship game against Oregon last year when they had to mount a comeback. And he made some really impressive plays that showed off that raw talent, the arm talent, the 6'5", 235-pound frame. That's all still there. But the sample size is what it is. We're not talking about a young, promising prospect at the college level anymore. We're talking about a guy who is coming toward the end of the finish line for his college career. And, they were under 75 passing yards late in the third quarter against Northwestern last week. They were under 75 passing yards through 3 quarters against Oregon in that home game where you were just begging anyone to score. The defense holds Oregon to 3 points through about 40 minutes of that game. The offense only scored 3 points. You need your quarterback to make big plays in big moments. And unfortunately for Drew Allar, that's where he has come up short, whether it's the Ohio State matchups over the years, some of the Michigan matchups, Notre Dame last year where he threw kind of an unconscionable interception at the end and didn't really put up big numbers generally, missed on some easier throws. And then you look at the Oregon game this year until that late comeback where they start letting it loose a little bit. He's just unfortunately been a guy who, whether he was coached this way by Penn State or whether it's just kind of in his DNA, he has been ultra afraid to make mistakes. And I think that shows up in the way he plays. He's got one of the best TD to INT ratios you'll find in college football. But I think that comes at the detriment of producing some big plays, some downfield throws. And again, it's been a couple different offensive coordinators, Mike Yurcich and then now Andy Kotelnicki. And so it's hard for me to say it's coaching or it's the receivers because they did reboot the receiver system. And I think ultimately you're just looking at a spot where you get to the end here. There's not a lot of marquee moments in his career. He's going to be top 5 all time for passing yards, top 5 all time for passing touchdowns. His season is over. His career is over. And now he has to focus on the NFL. And that journey looks a lot different than we thought it might coming out of Penn State. But I think that's really where a lot of whether it's blame or responsibility, whatever you call it, it's just the failure to meet expectations, I think in a big way is kind of typified by Drew Allar. And I'll throw a stat your way. People wanted him benched, wanted Sean Clifford benched in 2022 when he was a senior starter playing the best football of his career because they wanted to get the true freshman Drew Allar in there. Sean Clifford finished that year as the Rose Bowl MVP. Drew Allar got nice spot starts. He ended up burning red shirt. He was the number 2 QB. But they didn't bench Sean. You get to the end of their careers now, Sean Clifford against top 10 opponents at home or on neutral fields, he averaged about 280 passing yards. In those same settings, Beaver Stadium or a neutral field against a top 10 opponent, Drew Allar is around 150 passing yards average. And I hate to say this to your fans, but that's kind of Iowa pass game production right there. That's not what you expect from the number 1 quarterback recruit in the country, with your high-profile offensive coordinator and all the continuity around him this year. Same coordinator, same quarterbacks coach, same offensive line, 2 senior running backs who he's played a bunch of football with. And yet he kind of him and the offense looked clunky this year. And a lot of times you felt like you were watching a first-year starter versus a guy who's played this much football. So there's deserved blame. But as we learn more about what went wrong this year, maybe what went wrong in the last couple of years for James Franklin's era on offense, start to learn more leaks from that, maybe we'll have a better concept. But right now, I think that there's deservedly some egg on the face of Drew Allar just based on the lack of production.
It's interesting to me too, because I get that Iowa's been the pot shot of offense, and look, we all get it, right? No sane Iowa fans get to tell you that Iowa had a good passing game or a good offense. It's factually incorrect. But the steps Tim Lester's taken has been really impressive, and I always find it funny how like 250 passing yards is like that new cute girl that comes into the school, right? 250 rushing yards is the girl you grew up with, and she's just as cute, but your eyes are on the new thing, right? Like, it's still the same amount of yards. Like, Iowa's rushing game's been pretty respected, and that's kind of my whole pivotal matchup I'm looking for this week, because yes, they lost Abdul Carter, right? Penn State's defense. Iowa's offensive line just got Joe Moore, midseason honor, right? I think that's going to be a very pivotal matchup. So I want to flip to the defense real quick. And one of the mind-blowing things for me, Tyler, is Penn State's not been able to stop the run. And that's been one of the most mind-boggling things. I think Iowa fans and a lot of reporters around the country will tell you, like, they've always had respect for Penn State in the trenches. You can go name after name after name. But that's kind of the big thing for me. Like, if Iowa was able to get 4.5, 5 yards of carry against this Penn State team, I think it could take a turn for the worse. But maybe specifically, what's been going on for the last couple of weeks with this Penn State defense? And I mean, where are they looking to kind of ignite that fire? Where are they looking to get that production? And just from your vantage point, what are some key things that maybe are just missing compared to past great Penn State defenses?
Again, let's bring up some context about expectations versus reality. You just hired the highest paid defensive coordinator in the history of college football. The guy who helped your rival, Ohio State, win a national championship last year, and it was considered the biggest all-in move that Penn State made over the course of last offseason. And we were told, hey, it could take some time. It has taken time at other campuses with Jim Knowles' defense for everyone to kind of be on the same page and for it to really get rolling. Well, our response to that was like, they're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. They've got a lot of established veteran talent. James Franklin has always said Penn State, no matter who the defensive coordinator is, wants to play a certain style of football, and they've lived up to it. Brent Pry to Manny Diaz to Tom Allen, it wasn't necessarily always top 5 in the country, but it was typically top 10 to 15 in the country. A lot of swagger on that side of the ball. Guys appeared to be having fun. Not seeing that swagger, not seeing the stops that they've needed. If they make a stop late against Oregon in a couple of different moments, they get away with the win there. If they can stop Nico and UCLA's offense at any point in time, essentially over the course of that game, they got a good chance of winning. They gave up 42 points to UCLA. I mean, I know that this, Jerry Neuheisel's this wonder kid now, but that was unfathomable going into the game. And then last week they had a late lead, and they gave up a long drive that led to a go-ahead field goal for Northwestern. Get off the field. They haven't been able to get off the field. A lot of time of possession issues for this team. And I think it starts with the defensive line. It's a group that had to replace arguably the best defensive player in America last year in Abdul Carter. But they've also taken some other hits at defensive end with a guy who was ruled ineligible by the NCAA. They had a player transfer that was kind of a surprise. They had a really promising young player out for the season. But at the end of the day, we thought they'd be able to put the pieces together there. And so far, it has been disappointing in getting the quarterbacks off platform. It has been disappointing in limiting 5-yard gains to 2 or 3 yard gains and kind of putting the pressure on the other team from a down and distance standpoint. And we've heard even this week where the defensive line just hasn't necessarily been in sync the way it needs to be with the entire overall scheme. And so that's a problem. But for me, what has really taken things south for this defense was an injury to Tony Rojas, who I think was really on the rise as a star player for this defense. He had a big performance against Oregon. He was getting into the backfield throughout non-conference play, and he was playing really well off Amari Campbell, who they brought in from North Carolina. I think he's been really steady as their middle linebacker. I think he's lived up to expectations, but those two were looking like a force together. Rojas goes down with an injury on the practice field in between the Oregon game and the UCLA game. Nothing that we saw, but we did know that it ruled him out long-term. And so that was a big loss. We didn't understand how much until they got to UCLA. They're playing Dom DeLuca like 90+% of snaps alongside Amari Campbell. He's a 6-year senior, former walk-on, one of the great walk-on stories in Penn State history, but he's best suited as a supplemental defensive piece. That's what he was last year, 20 to 30 snaps a game. He was over 70 snaps at UCLA, and they were targeting him. And it was pretty ugly at times. And Northwestern kind of picked up on that last week. And so they've had trust issues with their linebacker depth for a while, and that's reared its head and not being willing to get some of these young players out there. And I assume because of what they're seeing on the practice field. But that front seven right now, they're not playing with authority. They're not playing with much depth. and they're not looking like they're having a lot of fun. And so if that doesn't change against Iowa, a team that I think there's a lot of respect for what their offensive line is accomplishing this year. They spread the ball a little bit as a run attack, but everyone's pretty effective who's involved with it. And this is a ball control type offense. To me, this is basically the worst case scenario for the kind of offense that Penn State wants to see right now, because they just faced a toned down version of that in the Northwestern Wildcats, and they had trouble getting off the field.
Tyler, we'll wrap this up with the two-part question. One, is this – obviously there's a ton of NFL talent on Penn State's team. That's going to be the case year in, year out. Obviously, with the expectations they had earlier in the year, is this going to be a group that is fired up to play Iowa, or guys really just starting to prepare themselves and look ahead to the NFL and they're thinking, hey, look, the head coach is fired, the guy who recruited me is fired, quote, we're not winning the national championship. What do you think the mentality of the team's going to be? And then give me your final prediction, how you think Saturday unfolds.
Out of like the 12 guys who are projected to be NFL picks next year, maybe 2 or 3 have actually played up to expectation. And so I don't think anybody should be like, I'm going to put it in cruise control and just take my talents to the NFL. Hey, if you want to be a 6th or 5th round pick, great. But this is pride. It's also, if you want to have professional aspirations, you got to start accruing some improved film. This is a big question, man. This is a big question what this team's going to show up from a mindset standpoint on Saturday night. It's never an easy place to play in the night game. And now you throw in all the other stuff, new quarterback, new interim coach. I think they picked the absolute right guy, Terry Smith. He's been James Franklin's right-hand man for the last 12 years, been the cornerbacks coach. He was a standout wide receiver here in the late 80s, early 90s. I would think there's a really good chance that he's retained on the staff, even if they bring in a different head coach. We're hearing that he can be the head coach, but I think he's got to really go do something special here to win that job. Ultimately, we have heard a lot of guilt from the players. I talked to Nick Dawkins, team center, team captain. He said that they have massive feelings of guilt and regret about not living up to their expectations on the field, and then seeing their father figure, their head coach, the guy who brought everybody to campus, the guy who was in their living rooms in high school, to see him get fired at this stage. They have a lot of remorse on that. And I think they're also angry with the decision. I don't think that this isn't a team that's been unburdened by an ugly coaching situation. I think that they are kind of torn up about it. And so Terry Smith talked about it. He said, everyone failed James Franklin. He said, that's why Coach Franklin is not the coach. We all failed him. And so we'll see if that results in them, feeling bad for themselves and going out there and getting pummeled by an Iowa team that I know can smell blood in the water right now, or if it means they're resilient, they fight for the man to their left and the right and for their interim coach, and they go out there and they throw some haymakers earlier. I think we'll get a pretty good read. My concern here, David, if they are playing purely off of that emotional moment and they're playing purely from that adrenaline, that's hard to sustain for 4 quarters, because you're going to have ebbs and flows. You're going to have a turnover. You're going to have a big play you give up on defense. And I just wonder if this team, they told us they were ready to bounce back after Oregon. They told us they were ready to bounce back against UCLA. I'm lacking the benefit of the doubt for them right now, but I think you'll see some fight. My question is, will it be enough to sustain them to pull off a win? I've got them losing 24-20 personally. It is what it is for them right now, and there's a good chance they get to their second bye week under 500. And I told you, this was the team that was supposed to go out there and do something no one's done here since 1986. And when they come out of that bye week, they go to Ohio State. Wish me luck,
Wisconsin might be the only team with a more brutal stretch, and obviously what they got with Fickle right now. But again, Tyler's one of my favorite people on 247 Sports Network. Does a terrific job. Stay locked into Penn State's 24/7 site. As always, stay locked into HawkeyeInsider.com, and the Swarmcast and 247 Sports as a whole is going to bring you the most in-depth coverage of Iowa Penn State on Saturday night.